I think doing what you enjoy keeps you consistent, so you end up doing the work because we know the importance of it. But ignoring weaknesses often leads to imbalances because a particular muscle group may end up being too strong for the opposing muscle group, and that usually creates overuse injuries.
I love this interview with head trainer and founder of D8 Training, Neven Antic. In this episode, he shares simple tips you can start doing today to add to your workouts. The simple strategies have already helped me get stronger, burn more energy and fat, and build extra muscle. The best part of these strategies and these tips is that it requires no extra time in your workouts. This means you'll be getting more bang for your buck. And this is something, if you know me, that I love. I love stacking habits and achieving more in the same amount of time. Neven also openly shares his past experiences, reflecting on lessons learned and how he could have done things differently had he known better. I appreciated his honesty and insights into his journey because it will help us ensure that we don't make the same mistakes. Every time I interview Neven, I always get so much value and actionable steps. That is why I keep asking him to come back onto the podcast. Welcome again, Neven, to the D8 Training Podcast. How long have you been training for and doing gym?
I started when I was 16, so about 20 years. I'm about 36 now, so 20 years of training under my belt.
How old are you really?
I'm 41, so there you go. Quarter of a decade, so I probably started when I was about 16. I remember my brother took me to the gym my first time and I loved it.
How has your approach to training evolved over the years, and what key lessons have shaped the way you train today?
I think one of the key ones for me that resonates is, and I see it all the time here in the gym, when I first started, my focus was adding more weight to the bar. I almost allowed my ego to take over, whereas it's really focusing on that, what we refer to as intensity. Doing heavier lifts, more weight, rather than how do I keep improving over time.
How do you know when to add more weight?
There's multiple ways of looking at it. There's something that's called reps in reserve. There's RPE, which is the effort of a lift. That's usually one that most people can understand quite well. So you use a scale of 1 to 10, and 10 being I couldn't do any more weight, I couldn't do any more reps. That was as much weight as I could potentially lift that day. Whereas an 8 would usually mean that I could probably do 1 or 2 more reps that I'll be able to lift. So generally that's an indication that you can go up a little bit in weight, or you could do more reps, obviously. So you kind of look at your effort for that particular set, and then you kind of rate it as in, what was it out of 10?
I'm doing squats, I'm holding weight, 10 kilos, and I get to the end of my 10th rep, because that's what I need to do, and I was like, well, I probably could have gone up, done another 5 or 6. That means I should probably go up in weight. Whereas if I'm holding a 20 and I'm shaking as I'm getting to the 9th and 10th, I either should go down or maintain.
That's correct, yeah. So if you've got 5 or 6 left in the tank, generally that means, yes, let's go up in weight. And especially if you're trying to hit a specific rep range, which in our class, we generally have a rep range we're trying to hit. So that would usually be an indication, let's go up in weight, rather than just doing that same weight over and over again.
One of the things that has changed over the time is now you're progressively overloading. What does that mean?
There's generally 3 key ways to do it. There's other ways, but these are the 3 main ones we play with, and most people have the ability to do that quite easily. The first one is, like I mentioned before, is increasing the weight. And use the perfect example. If you've got 5 reps left in your tank before you're about to kind of like really fatigue, then you would increase the weight. That's one option. If you don't want to increase the weight, you might increase the reps. That's a second way of doing it. So instead of doing your 10 kilos for 10 reps, you would do that 10 kilos for 15 reps. And then the third way of actually, progressively overloading over time is to do more work in a shorter period of time. What that means is you would rest less between exercises. So you wouldn't rush the exercise, you wouldn't try and get through the exercise a lot faster, you would rest less. So if normally you rest a minute between exercise, well maybe you rest 30 seconds. So what that means is you'll be doing more work during that hour session or however long you're training for. And that's another way of progressive over time. The key is to keep a measurement of these and to track it so you know what you did the week before, because if you're only looking at it at that particular session, you won't really know whether you did more or less the session before that. That's why tracking is such a key part of having the ability to progressively overload over time and improve all your lifts.
I also like less rest. It means I'll be over and done a lot quicker.
Correct, so sometimes when you don't have the time, that's a great way of getting in. You know, I've only got half an hour, well, what can I do? Let's just shorten my rest period. I know I'm not going to hit any max weights that day. I'm not going to hit really heavy loads, but I'm going to get a really good work in. I'm going to feel good about myself. I'm going to get in, get out of the gym and focus on what I need to do for the rest of the day.
If you could go back and give your younger self, maybe your 16 or your 17-year-old self, one piece of advice about training, what would it be?
Probably one is get a coach, get someone early on to help you in that space, because sometimes we have this excitement and energy, I'll say, to go to the gym and work out, but we don't always know what we're doing. So oftentimes we're copying things that we, especially nowadays, we see off of social media or whether it's the internet. But when you're doing those movements, you don't really know, are you doing it exactly the right way? So getting a coach in your corner would be, first of all, would be a great way of doing it. From a second point of view is, I think from me knowing what I know now, is mastering a full range of motion. Like I mentioned before, I was so fixated on improving my weight, I wasn't really thinking, am I doing this movement all the way? Am I doing a full range of motion on this particular lift? I was more fixated on just lifting more weight.
Can you give me an example of a full range of movement move?
So, and two exercises most people will know as an example is a bench press, and a squat will be the second one. So with a bench press, what that means is we're having our arms fully extended, and then as I'm lowering the bar, I'm lightly touching my chest, and then going all the way back to that locked out position. So that's a full range of motion. So that's one example. In a squat, this is one where you often see it where people cut short on depth. A full range of motion on a squat is where we're going down all the way and essentially almost trying to get our butt to touch kind of our heels. So that's a full range of motion, and you can do that with no weight. But then once we had a bar, we had lots of weight, people struggle to go down all the way because generally they're not strong enough in that bottom position. So that's a perfect example of where somebody would cut the range because they're not going all the way down. They're getting an ego hit because they've added an extra 5 kilos compared to the weight they did before in terms of the weight. But oftentimes they do that at the expense of sacrificing depth.
There's something like squats. It's always been said to make sure when you squat not to have your knee go over the toes. What makes you sure that going knees over toes and doing that full range of motion is actually safe?
I'm a big believer if something's said often enough and marketed enough and visually seen enough, it becomes the norm. People just tend to believe that. And then all of a sudden you'll get outliers who will start to question those beliefs. And then we start to see some success stories where it's worked the other way. It's important to keep an open mind, but I also think you should try different things and see what works for you as well. When I first started, I never did knees over toes. I think that's part of the reason why I had so many knee injuries. I had an ACL repair on one side and had 2 clean outs in my knees. And I never did that kind of range or that kind of work. I just did heavy lifting, sitting my butt back like traditionally you're taught to do, and not going through a full range of motion. What I found over time is I started to pick up cues from other coaches, and 2 things that really resonated with me that changed my viewpoint was, the first one was when you look at third world countries, you often see them crouching in a deep position with their knees pushing way past their toes. They're just hanging out there, they're just spending time in those positions, where we don't tend to do that here. In Australia, it's very rare to see that. And sometimes in the class, we'll have clients at the end of the session just sit in that deep squat position, and we really struggle with it. Most clients can only get 2-3 minutes there. And you see the lack of mobility that they have in those positions.
I remember when my kids were little and they would actually just sit there in that squat position and they'll play, and then I'll test it out. I'm like, oh, I don't know how you do this.
That's right. And often you hear it, if you don't use it, you lose it. And that's a perfect example for that, for me, in terms of mobility. And we just don't spend time in those positions. So that was one of the key ones where that kind of opened my eyes, like, well, how are they able to do that? And then the second one is just go out and watch a kid play at a playground. They're not consciously thinking, I need to get my hips back behind me as I'm landing from this position. They're just naturally going through the motion. And quite often when you see them jump off a playground, they're going to land with their knees over their toes because it's just a natural way of kind of reacting and being in that movement. My belief is we need to expose ourselves in a controlled environment like the gym so we can work on building up that range, building up the strength, building up the weight. And then over time, we progressively overload those positions rather than me getting a first timer who's had knee problems and getting them to do like a really deep squat with knees over the toes. That's not going to be very nice on their knees or their bodies.
I guess with anything, it's working up to it over time. Also mentioned a bit about tempo, so slowing it down. Because sometimes I feel like slowing it down is a waste of time and it's also harder. I just want to get in and out of the gym as fast as I can. Why should I slow it down? And am I getting any other benefits from doing it?
I see this with most of our clients. We're so busy outside with our lives, with our family life, with our work, with our business, everything else that we have going on. And we kind of almost bring that mentality into the gym. So we come in here, we're like, I just want to get in, get out quickly. Especially somewhere like what we do, where it's an hour class or an hour one-to-one session, you're there for that hour anyway. You might as well, in my opinion, get the most out of that. And the way we kind of structure our programs is to actually work on tempo. Tempo is something that I think is often neglected in the fitness industry. We do it for three key reasons. The first one is we get more time under tension, which leads to greater muscle activation. So we get more strength and more hypertrophy gains.
Tell me in simple terms, what does that mean?
So more time under tension means that our muscle is exposed to more tension during that rep, during that set, because we're controlling our movement. So we're taking 3 seconds to go down as opposed to going down really fast.
So does that mean I'm building more muscle?
Correct. Because if you think in an example of just simple, let's use a squat as an example. If I'm only going down for 1 second and I have 10 reps to do, so I might go down for 1 second and let's say it's 1 second to come back up. That's 2 seconds per rep. That would equate to 20 seconds of time under tension for that set. If I slow you down though, and you're taking 3 seconds to go down and then 1 second to come back up, that's 4 seconds per rep. So all of a sudden you've gone from 20 seconds of time under tension for that muscle group to 40 seconds of time under tension for that muscle group. So you've doubled the time under tension for that particular muscle group, which is going to obviously lead to more work, so more energy burned, more muscle growth because that muscle is being under time under tension. So it creates, like we said, more strength and more hypertrophy or more muscle. Okay. The reality is you're here for that hour. So if you did the first example where it only took you 20 seconds, the next 40 seconds you're resting as opposed to you could actually be doing more exercise. In that regard. So that's the first one, the first reason.
I like that, getting more bang for buck, hey?
Correct. And I tell clients that. I always say, you're here for the hour, get the most out of it, get as much out of it as you can. I like to get my money's worth for most things that I do. I'd recommend that to clients as well. So that's the first one. That's the first key reason. The second one for us is sometimes clients have a challenging time to understanding what muscle is meant to work when they're doing a particular movement. And we don't expect everyone to be a personal trainer to have a really good body awareness. So by slowing it down, you can actually sense what muscle groups are working. And this is really good for people that have had injuries in the past and their particular muscle groups may not be activated or may not feel like they're working. So just by slowing them down, and then it also allows us as coaches to walk around and put them in the right positions, can really help with that, what's called the mind-muscle connection. That also helps, reduce the injury risk because we're controlling that movement. We're not just banging in and out of that particular exercise. And then the third one, we actually get more bang for your buck, if you want to say that way, or more with less weight. So it's less joint stress over time, less injury risk. So we don't have to use a 20 kilo. We can just use a 10 kilo, but we slow it down a little bit. And by the end of that set, you're still feeling that really good burn in your muscles. You can feel it, and you've done more work essentially with less weight, so less joint stress.
So when you're going time and tempo, it's normal to actually go down in weight.
Yeah, depending on what you're used to. If you're used to just going down really fast in that 1 second, you may be able to hold a 20 kilo doing it that way. But the reality is if you try to do that for 3 seconds the way down, you may not be able to. So you may need to initially go down to a 15 kilo to have the same effect, get through all those 10 reps. If you use the example before, yes, you've gone down in weight, you've done an extra 20 seconds, you've doubled your workload, and you've only gone down 5 kilos. The goal then is next week when you come back, is you're trying to 16 kilos or 17 kilos and have that progressive overload mentality.
How do I overcome my ego?
That's the hard part sometimes because you're used to lifting that 20 and now you've got to drop to the 15. For me, I like to think, well, what set was harder? And usually when we slow you down, that set is a lot harder because you're doing it for 40 seconds as opposed to a quick 20 seconds. So oftentimes in the classes, we'll walk around, we'll check on clients and there'll be 2-3 clients and they're always waiting for the next station. And I always tell them, if you're always waiting, it's you. It's not the person next to you because you're always going too fast. And then they're like, yeah, I know. And then they'll slowly start to slow down. And we've had clients where sometimes it's taken them up to a year to get the hang of it. And then I'll walk around, I'll walk past them and I'll jokingly say, you've changed. You used to do that so quickly and now you're actually doing it really well. They're like, yeah, I've noticed a difference. So sometimes it just takes time to kind of bring us down into that environment.
And I think it's life too, but just being mindful and taking that time to slow down because we are so fast paced. We've got that instant gratification. Yeah. As opposed to having to wait. Yeah, exactly. Perfect example is, and I say this all the time, clients, and I struggle with it because I am busy. Mindful eating is another example. When you're trying to lose weight, one of the keys is just be mindful of what you're eating. Don't just scoff down the food. Be mindful, take your time, have a few chews, put your fork down, come back to it, and you'll find you feel fuller quicker. It's no different in the gym, but most of us, we just, we're rushing from one thing to the next. So sometimes if you can just slow down, and like I said, the class is a perfect example because you're there for the hour regardless. You can't pick up your phone and do work there when you're there. You're just going to be there, so make the most of it. Be present.
Exactly.
So I'm a big believer in focusing on strengths and doing what you enjoy, whether it's at work, life, training. So for example, I won't go out and read all these contracts. I'll hire a lawyer to do that, or I prefer sprinting over marathons. you won't catch me doing 20 kilometers of running. Just not my thing. But does the same principle apply in the gym? Should I double down on my strengths and the exercises I enjoy and that I'm good at, like squats and chin-ups? Or is there real value in working on my weaknesses, even if I don't like them, like the back extension?
I think doing what you enjoy keeps you consistent, so you end up doing the work because we know the importance of it. But ignoring weaknesses often leads to imbalances because a particular muscle group may end up being too strong for the opposing muscle group, and that usually creates overuse injuries. For me, I like a balance of both. Sometimes I'll get a new client come in and I just know that they're really weak in particular muscle groups, particular areas. Quickest path or the quickest way out of for that client may be doing specific exercises, but I know they're not very good at those and it's going to be really challenging for them. One, they won't enjoy it because it's going to be really low weight, and we kind of almost have to rehab them out of those exercises. So the best path is, like I said, is just doing those exercises for that whole hour. That won't create much enjoyment for them. It won't create excitement for them. And oftentimes they'll just stop because they'll be like, this is just too hard, it's too boring, it just feels like too much work. So my approach is generally interject some of those exercises that they need, but then give them some more fun stuff. Give them things they can push themselves a little bit more. They can feel like they're training, because nobody likes to do rehab for the whole session.
In reality, we should be working on our weaknesses in the gym, what we're not good at, so we can clear up these imbalances. But that's not fun, and to do a combination of both.
Correct. It might be that, hey, I know I need to work on this exercise. All right, well, I love the bench press. I'm going to do the bench press first, but after that, I know I need the back extension, so I'm going to do that. But then I know I've got the bench press after that, so I'm looking forward to it each one. So I think interjecting some of those exercises that you're not good at, or that you know you have a weakness for, is really important, because if you don't, and you just end up doing the exercise that you like I said, quite often leads to imbalances, because those muscle groups will keep continuing to get stronger while you're neglecting those other areas. It is really important to do that. The key though is knowing what your weak links are, because most of us have a bias and we're like, nah, back extension is not a problem for me. I just don't enjoy it. I'm good at it. I'm fine at it. And then we won't do that particular movement, or we won't do a movement that's similar to that. So it doesn't have to be a particular exercise. It's that particular movement or the particular muscle group that's the key. So one, it's knowing, and most of us don't have a good sense of where we're at.
And that's where a coach can help.
100%, right? So, and that's what I mentioned before, is I wish I had a coach, because one of the key parts of a coach is identifying at the start, well, what am I already good at? That's awesome. That's usually the stuff that makes me really good at whatever sport I'm playing, or whatever it is that I do, if it's more of a competitive nature. But then what are those weak areas that potentially could lead to injuries that we want to get on top of, so that way I can then continue to work on my strengths as I go through it. Most of us have a bias towards ourselves, that we don't feel like we have weaknesses. So having someone there that can watch us and make sure that we're actually doing those exercises correctly is going to be really a key part of maintaining longevity with less time with dealing with injuries.
I want to talk about you now, and something that you've done. So not your clients, but about you. What is something that you neglected, and if you could turn back time, what would you do differently?
I think without a shadow of doubt, it would be around, I'll say, stretching and mobility work. And you can take that multiple different ways. And it doesn't mean that I wish I did 2 hours of stretching every day. I think it was just doing some key movements into a full range of motion, which creates the mobility that's often required. And then finding some areas that I was lacking in, where I was really tight, and just focusing on those from a stretching perspective. And that might have been 10, 15 minutes a day that I would do, focusing on those areas, which would have definitely reduced the amount of injuries that I had, the amount of niggles that I had earlier on in my career, and it would have allowed me to do more of what I loved. So for me, that would have been an investment of time. Quite often, that's the way I see it now with mobility and stretching work. It's actually an investment to keep me healthy, keep me doing more of what I love, as opposed to training really hard for 4 weeks and then having an injury, and then I'm out for 4 weeks rehabbing that anyway. So I'd rather invest that time, almost what they refer to as prehab.
So you're saying stretching and mobility. What's the difference between the two?
They can be interchangeable. Some people look at flexibility, some people look at stretching, some people look at mobility. For me, often mobility is, do I have the ability to get into a position when I'm doing a particular movement? So an example might be a squat. So do I have the required mobility in my ankles, in my hips, to allow me to get down into that bottom of position of a squat? So that for me is mobility. Stretching is a way sometimes to, if we identify that we have tight ankles or we have tight hips, stretching is a form of, or a method to help us get more range in those particular areas. It's a combination of both. First of all, identifying, do I have the required range to get into that position, to be mobile? And then if I don't, what are the stretches required, or what are the movements required to help me get that range?
What you're saying is, when you're lifting weights, you got those injuries because you weren't stretching and doing mobility exercises.
Correct. And it wasn't just that I was lifting weights. I was playing soccer, and we didn't, most sports, we warm up at the start, we'll do a little bit of dynamic stretching or some static stretching, and most of the time we just spent like having a bit of banter, so nobody really takes it super seriously. At the end you might have a cool down, which is 5 minutes, and you do a little bit of stretching, and that was it. That was pretty much the extent of the stretching and the mobility work that I did back in those days. Whereas knowing what I know now, well, it's maybe a 15-20 minute separate session, whether you do it at home or in the gym, and just focusing on those areas that you need, the imbalance, the weaknesses that I have, and just dialing in on those and really trying to get as much out of it as you can in those sessions.
Would you recommend doing like a stretching class or a yoga class? And I've seen now they've popped up about actually where people go and stretch you. Yeah,
100%. I think any one of those is going to be great. The reality is find something that you can adhere to. If that's a 15-20 minute session for yourself at home and you know you can do that, which most people won't do, they'll say they'll do it, but they won't. And if you can't do that, then go in and do a stretching class, do a yoga. Even a Pilates, something like that's going to be great because you're going to get a lot more of that range and mobility work that you generally won't by yourself.
That's something I've probably learned. I always have good intentions of doing stretching or activities at home, but it doesn't happen. So I'll find either an accountability partner that we do it together because I know I won't let them down, or I'll just pay someone to do it to get the result. And then I find I can actually get there quicker.
Oftentimes when I speak with clients, I might speak on the phone the first time and I'll ask them a couple of questions about themselves, and then I'll say, well, what have you done in the past? They're like, oh yeah, I've got a gym set, I've got in my backyard. And my first question to them always is, when was the last time you used it? And they'll usually laugh. They'll say, oh, probably 3 months ago. And I'll ask them the next question is, why haven't you done it? And they're like, I don't have anyone to hold me accountable. You just make excuses. Something else will always pop up. But the interesting thing is, it's easier for them to walk into their backyard and do gym there as opposed to driving here and doing it. But when they drive here, they've committed, they've booked in, they'll come. And then all of a sudden, well, what's better for you? To pay somebody and actually do that work, or to have something at home that you never use? You've nailed it. It's the accountability component and support component. And sometimes just having to overthink it. Just come in here and we tell you what to do, and you basically do that, and we have a bit of a laugh, and that's it.
That's what I love about D8 training. It's done for me. So you organise the exercises, you tell me what I need to do, and you get that balance. Whereas I know previously I'd go to the gym, I'll make up my own workout, do everything pushing, and then I can't walk. My arms are so tight because I got the exercises wrong. I didn't put the right ones together.
That's right. You did what you enjoyed rather than what you needed at that time.
What are your thoughts on cardio?
Having played soccer for such a long period of time, I always had a bad association with cardio, mostly because they made us do lots of cardio, and the cardio that they made us do was always long distance running. And I had a bad association with that form, if that makes sense. And I still continue to play. We play masters a little bit, so that was kind of my way of saying, well, I do some form of cardio, but our soccer season only goes for like 5-6 months, and I only play every second week. So in reality, like you said before, I was hiding my weaknesses. I was kind of saying, oh yeah, I'm taking care of this, but in reality I wasn't. So I've changed my viewpoint probably the last year or so around cardio, because I also believe cardio is a great way to improve your strength, and I should say probably improve your recovery in the gym. Having a good aerobic base, so when you do cardio, you can build up your aerobic base. It allows you to recover better between sessions, but also during that session, it allows you to recover more quickly between sets. I almost use that as a motivation to get back into doing some cardio. I knew, okay, if I can get my aerobic base up, I'm going to recover better between workouts, I'm going to recover quickly better between sets. It was almost kind of cutting out that negative association that I had originally with cardio.
So how does cardio help me get stronger in the gym?
The main reason we do cardio is from a heart health perspective. So we want to build up our hearts to be able to have the capacity, obviously, to pump more blood throughout the body. And by building up our aerobic base of the ability of the distance we can run, and again, the key here is that we're improving it over time. So we need to run further in the same amount of time, or have a way to progressively measure that. If I'm always just running 2Ks, and it's not really much of an effort, I'm probably not going to improve in that space. Yes, I'm getting my energy burned for that exercise, but the goal really should be to try and improve that time.
If I'm currently running 2Ks, it's either next time try to run more, or try to do the same 2Ks in less.
Yes, and ideally, in a way, let's say you're running 2Ks in 10 minutes, just for easy numbers. The next time you're trying to run 2Ks in 9 minutes 50, as an example. And you're slowly chipping away. And that might take time, whatever that may be. Or like you said, the next time you run, you're running 2.1 Ks in 10 minutes. So you're trying to learn a little bit further in the same period of time. Distance can also be a factor as well, obviously. Trying to take that progressive overload mentality and apply it to to the running, which will then improve our aerobic capacity. The reason that helps us in the gym is because now my heart is able to pump more blood to my muscles, and it allows me to recover more quickly between my bouts of strength in the gym. And I've noticed a difference myself. Like, I'm able to recover. If it might have taken me 2 minutes to recover between a really heavy set, now it might take me 90 seconds as an example. And I could ready to go again. So again, I can now do more work in that session while without sacrificing the intensity that I have in that session.
So really it's good for your heart health. It's also good for the recovery in the gym.
Correct. Not that I didn't care about my heart health. I just had a bad association with cardio and I didn't want to do it. So I had to almost not trick my mind into it, but understand why I was doing it. And it was to help with something that I love. I love training in the gym. I like the results that I get from it. This was a way to complement that, to still keep me motivated and to still think, okay, well, rather than just going out for an easy jog, I'm going to try and improve my times over time. And then that's obviously how I was able to get better and better. Cardio doesn't have to mean long distance running. There's multiple different ways to do cardio. If you have bad knees and your body just doesn't handle the running, you could do bike, you could do airdyne, rowing machine. There's multiple different ways of doing it. I think the key is to find something that you enjoy. And to be fair, now when I run, I actually enjoy it. My runs are broken down into not long distance. I actually prefer more like intervals. So I might run 4 minutes, then I might rest 2 minutes. Then I'll run 4 minutes again. And then other sessions, I might run for 1 minute with a 1 minute break. So depending on the program that I have at the time. So I found a way to make it interesting and exciting for me. So I still enjoy it. Everybody needs to do the same. Try a couple of different forms, see what works for you, and then make that a regular routine in terms of what you have.
So if I run 10 minutes of cardio, is that enough or should I be doing more or less?
10 minutes of cardio for someone that's just starting out may be a lot. The key is next time I come, I do 10 and a half minutes. Then I do 11 minutes.
But I don't want to do 10 and a half. I just want to do 10 minutes, happy to commit to that 2-3 times a week. Is that enough for my heart health?
I think your level and where you're at is probably not enough because you've been training for a while, you've got good health, you're able to do more. So your body will be physically capable of doing a lot more than that. So I challenge you to do 20 minutes. So 20 to 30 minutes is where you want to be starting off with. But like I said, some clients may not be ready for that straight away. Well, if we're not ready for 30 minutes, well, are we ready for 10? And let's build on that.
So let's move on from the cardio. Let's settle this. Protein shakes, chicken breasts, and all that jazz. Does loading up on protein actually make a real difference? Or is that just a gym bro myth?
I think one message that I find that I keep repeating myself over and over again is around the protein and how much to consume. And I'm not sure where it's happened, whether it is the fitness space has created this bad vibe or bad feeling about protein. But it is one of those areas where we all need to improve on. The key rule that we often go back to here in the gym is 1.5 grams to 2 grams per kilogram of body weight. And I'll just use easy numbers here just so make it nice and simple. So if somebody will weigh 100 kilos, so for that particular individual, they need to be consuming between 150 grams of protein to 200 grams of protein per day. So obviously that's on the higher end. Most people aren't at 100 kilos. They need to be breaking that up between their meals throughout the day. The most important thing is getting the number. Second most important is how you break it up through the day. If you're not getting that close to that, just focus on getting that much per day. And then once you get better at that, then you start to introduce some at breakfast, some at lunch, and some at dinner. Kind of spacing it out through the day is a better option. There's a few reasons for that. One is it keeps us satiated. Most of us want to look good, want to have a good body composition. So that's the amount of muscle that we have to compare to fat. So oftentimes for that is we need to make sure we're not overeating. First one is it keeps us satiated. It's the most satiating out of the other 3 macronutrients with the carbohydrates and fat.
Satiated means it keeps us full.
That's right. As an example, you go try and eat half a kilo of chicken breast versus half a kilo of pizza.
Oh, I can eat the pizza, no problem.
100%, right? And if you look at the calories, the pizza is probably going to be higher in calories anyway. I'm not saying just eat that all the day, but that's just an example of that one particular food is going to keep you a lot more satiated. And maybe you just have 200 grams of chicken and then you have 200 grams of pizza along with it. That's still going to be a better balanced meal, obviously, versus just that pizza. Number 2 is it's required to rebuild any tissue in the body. So our muscles, our bones, our tendons, our skin, our hair. So we need protein to rebuild these tissues in our bodies. And if we don't get it from our diet, then it needs to come from somewhere else. And the only other place we have protein, which is essentially amino acids in our body, is from our muscles. What that means is, let's say I need to repair skin in my hand. That protein needs to come from somewhere. It's going to come from our muscle. We work hard to build our muscle in the gym. We want to keep it as long as we can. So that's why a key part of it is making sure we get enough protein. 3 is it's hard to overeat. And that example that I brought up before. So if you're eating a protein first, you're less likely to overeat in your meal because you start to feel the satiety kick in and the fullness as well.
I don't even think I could eat half a kilo of chicken.
And most of us wouldn't. 500 grams of chicken, as an example, to give you an idea, would be 100 grams of protein. So just remember, just because you're eating 500 grams of a particular meat doesn't mean it's 100% protein. Each food will have different amount of protein in there. So, but as a general rule of thumb, 20 grams of protein is inside 100 grams of uncooked meat. So 100 grams of chicken or lean beef as an example, and some fish as well generally. 500 grams would give you the equivalent of 100 grams. So if you broke that up throughout the day, all of a sudden you've got 100 grams of protein already.
We've covered a lot today, and you've given us 7 points or tips in this episode. First one, progressively overloading, so increasing the weights over time, doing full range of movements, tempo, slowing it down, embracing what I'm not good at in the gym, the stretching, the mobility, cardio, and protein. What one should I focus on?
I think start with consistency. That for me is usually the biggest one.
That wasn't on the list.
Yeah, well, start with consistency in one of those areas. So you want to be consistent with your workouts as an example. Let's start with that. We want to be hitting the gym 2 to 4 times a week, depending on your goals. Focus on that. Don't focus on perfection. Focus on coming. Build that habit. Then work on your next habit. After that, okay, let's work on our protein as an example. Usually one of the areas I'll focus on with most clients is asking them what they eat for breakfast. Trying to get understanding without actually having any protein for breakfast, because that's an area where most clients are usually lacking. Dinner is usually good because they're having some sort of meat and veg. Lunch can be a hit of a miss. But quite often for breakfast, they're either not eating anything or they're just having something like toast, crumpets, or cereal. And we know there's not going to be hardly any protein in those. I always challenge them, well, what's a way we can introduce some protein as part of those meals? Ideally, my go-to is always going to be some form of eggs, but not everyone has the time or they want to make that effort to cook eggs in the morning. So then we work with them, well, what else can we do? Can we get a high protein yogurt along with their cereal as an example? Quite often, and we've used that example, I think in the past, is what you do. And I think that's great, having a smoothie first up, where you're going to have a piece of fruit, have some water in there, half an avocado like you do is great because it's going to add a little bit of fat in there as well, great healthy fats, and then you put a scoop of protein in there. So that usually will keep you full until lunch, and all of a sudden you've had 25 to 30 grams of protein first up in the morning. That'll keep you satiated, and then you can have your lunch later on. That's a great way, I think, for clients to focus on something early on. Something that's quick, that takes less than 5 minutes, doesn't make a massive impact to you the rest of your day.
I worked with a lot of clients as well, or even speaking to friends, and they're like, yep, I'm going to lose weight, I'm going to get fit, and I'm going to go down to the gym 4 times a week. They never went before. Then they're going to change their breakfast, their lunch, and their dinner. And as soon as they tell me, I give them 2 to 3 weeks, and that'll be out the door. Yeah. And I'm pretty much spot on because it's too much of a change for them.
Correct.
Whereas just by changing one thing, so committing to coming to the gym, doing that consistently, ticking that off, and then maybe in 4 weeks' time, changing breakfast, it's those small changes that add up and compound over time.
To be fair, there are some clients that I've had in the past, and the first week they're just gung-ho and they'll maintain it, but they're a rarity generally. It's usually they do really well in other parts of their life, whatever, usually they've got a business they run, they do really well, they've just neglected this part, and we give them stuff and they're just able to pick it up straight away. But most clients just don't have the time for that, or do they have the mental resilience to be able to do that? I think with them, we generally, most of the time we see success is, like you said, get that consistency up front first for the gym, make that as a sticking point, because that usually kicks over to the other parts. Then all of a sudden, you're less likely to go and binge on other foods, because you're like, hey, I've worked really hard, I don't want to add to all that work that I've done. And then let's improve on our diet. And then let's add some cardio after that. So slowly build upon that. And I always say, think about where you could be in 6 months as opposed to in 4 weeks, because there's a big difference if you have that mindset, and then we can maintain and stack those habits on top of each other.
Power of compounding.
Exactly.
Well, thanks, Neven, for joining us. That was great as always.
You're welcome. It's always good to be back on the show.
Thank you so much for tuning into the D8 Training Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to subscribe and follow our show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts from. Your support means the world to us. It helps us grow and continue bringing value to more people. Until next time, dominate your life.